All right, guys. Good morning, Canna friends and Canna foes. This is another episode of In the Weeds Prohibition Talk Radio. We have a great show coming your way today, guys. I'm excited for that. We also have Brandon Barberio on the line with us from Arizona. Brandon, how you doing today?
I'm great. How are you guys doing?
Great, man. Great. Today, guys, we have a great show coming for you. It's the Vermont Growers Association. It's a brand new little venture from three great people in the studio. One of us we all know really well, so we're really excited to bring this to the forefront. Let you guys know what they are doing and how you can find them. We also have some Canada news issues this week. We had some major catastrophes with my internet going all week long, and I never get to figure out. So we're probably going to skip the news a little bit. We might touch on some highlights here and there as we get through the show. But for this week, we're going to start it right off. We want to give a big shout out to all the supporters and friends and global listeners to our show. Again, you can find us online on Facebook at In the Weeds. You can find us on Twitter at In the Weeds, actually We Talk Radio, and on Instagram at In the Weeds VT. So like us, love us, and share some of your cannabis thoughts, memories, and pictures with us. So find us online, social media. Today we have the Vermont Growers Association guys. We have Eli Harrington, very well-known Vermont cannabis activist. We also have Jeff in studio with Jenny. So we are all going to talk about this new venture. So guys, first of all, we'll get right into it. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, what you're doing, and a little bit about cannabis in your lives.
Sure. Well, I'll start, and thanks for having us on, and shout out to everybody out there listening and watching online as well. So my name's Eli Harrington, and know a lot of people from events and advocacy here in Vermont. I met these guys with the Growers Association last fall, I think, originally. We stayed in touch, and I got kind of a sense of who they were. And actually, I knew who Jeff was through Instagram without knowing him, right? Which I think is a common thing in the cannabis world. And you meet someone, and you're like, oh, you're the choir man, or like, oh, you're VMR caregiver, or you're this person. Vermontawana, Vermont Growers on Instagram. So I felt like I had kind of, known him, and then I actually got a chance to meet Jeff and, Jenny, and get a sense of sort of what they were about and what they really wanted to do. I had all this experience in the State House, as an advocate for engagement. Here's what's going on, how to get involved. And now that the discussion's kind of evolving, it's time to think about what are some of the priorities and what do we want to focus on. So with these guys, with the Growers Association, we got a chance to focus on THC advocacy, small growers, small business, high quality, which we'll be talking about a lot and kind of what that means, and asking other people for their feedback about what that means, even more importantly, probably. I was pumped to start working with these guys. I met them, they had the setup in Nican back in May. I think a lot of people saw that show at the show at Essex and got a chance to meet these guys. So, there's a real office. The organization is real. It's registered. It's up and running. So I'm excited. We have another sort of way to formalize and organize, in this cannabis community. Too often we see sort of like factions forming and people looking for, where are the people who share my interests and priorities, and how can we get together and sort of push and march forward together and unite? Because that's really what this is about, is bringing people together and trying to focus and organize a little bit more. So I've been pumped to get a chance to know, Jeff and Jenny, Six Studio. And really thank you to Vermont Cannabis Solutions. We had a chance to speak at that luncheon and get to know even more people. So I'm pumped to introduce these guys, and let other people see, because I'm sort of joining on this, and we're opening our arms and looking for other people to join as well, as board members, as volunteers. We're totally just getting started. So that's what really this process is all about. So, yeah, pumped to be here.
I think Vermont needs something like this, man.
Oh, for sure. I mean, again, we'll talk more about sort of the platform, but the idea is talking about, is that we're THC. This organization, we respect hemp and CBD. A lot of things will probably cross over, but we're going to sort of organize around this and look at what we have with S54 right now, and the conversations that are sort of evolving. There's some things about it that are great, and how far we've come in this discussion. I think about 2017 when, Governor Scott vetoed the legalization bill, right? And here we are sort of knocking on the door to actually having tax and regulate. So, we're going to be really involved in that process, and now is the time, right now, before January. We have to get mobile, get organized, and really focus on, all right, what are these priorities going to be? And let people know, because this affects patients, this affects caregivers, this does affect a lot of hemp growers, and a lot of people who want to be involved. I mean, how many people do you meet coming out of different parts of your life, and it's like, oh snap, the dude who owns this bar is really interested in this and would love to get into this business, or the woman who owns this spa or this farm, so everything's coming up to the surface, and that's why it's a great time for us to be out here talking about this, and like we said, really inviting everybody in. It's free and party's free and everybody's invited.
Well, I mean, you've been in the State House for a long time now, so I mean, you have a pretty good feeling of where we're at, which we'll talk about later in the show after we get introduced to Jeff and Jenny here, because there's a lot of great conversation about this topic and what you guys envision the future to be. I think is a great aspect, and if Vermont can stand behind and we can all collaborate to get this done, which I think is what we're missing.
Well, and that's
right?
I mean, just seeing the evolution over the last few years, politics is usually slow. And in Vermont, its system is set up to be that way. That's why we don't have referendums, that can become law directly. So what's really been impressive, and one of the reasons why the cannabis community here is so special, and so awesome, is that there are so many more advocates. There's so many more voices speaking up, more websites, more organizations, more people forming companies. So, we're just seeing everybody kind of people like our army is, we're growing, our numbers are growing, and we're all on the right side of history. So I think more and more people feel comfortable sort of getting on board and coming out and saying, whether it's because they use cannabis, or whether because they're, like to grow it, if they want to start a business, if they want to add it to something they're doing already.
And it makes a lot of great options for farmers in Vermont.
Absolutely. I mean, we see what's going on with CBD and hemp, and I know it's really ironic. You talk about policy, like how hard we're going to make it to grow THC cannabis versus how easy we make it to grow CBD cannabis, in this state. If you compare those two things, it's obviously ridiculous to anybody who knows anything about cannabis, or maybe a basic understanding of plants, or exactly. So like, it's such an arbitrary thing, and that's just kind of how it goes with where we're at in history, right? Like, we have to overcome all these ridiculous stereotypes, all these ridiculous myths. I mean, X% of the country still thinks that, you're going to get hairy palms and start throwing people out of the window and like all this crazy. So, it's just part of where we're at right now. And the more advocates that are out there just educating, having good conversations, and just kind of showing face and even saying like, hey, this is not a scary thing. So honestly, tell your parents, tell your aunts and uncles, like, give every baby boomer in your life cannabis this year for the holiday season, whatever you celebrate. Make sure you send it. Make sure they share it around, because that's honestly, like, at those family gatherings, dinner tables, party, like dinner. Yeah, absolutely. That's what it's going to be. And so every next person that kind of like, turns on and changes their mind a little bit about this is somebody else who's going to join the
movement, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's been an interesting year. I mean, we're reading articles all the time, and I mean, like you said, we're meeting people like, I'm an ex-police officer that started a hemp grow. You're like, wait, what?
Right.
Like you were busting these guys years ago. You know what I mean? We're starting to see, politicians that were heavily against cannabis starting to turn and be a face of a business for cannabis. You know what I mean? Which is, again, ironic. Again, we're going to talk about a lot of this later because I can't wait to get all you guys going. Jeff. How you doing, man?
Good. Appreciate this, Joe. This is fantastic.
Sorry I can't quite see you behind my screen here, but we are live in studio, guys. Everybody's in studio today, which is a great times. So, Jeff, you find Eli online. Like, the Instagram thing's been amazing for the cannabis community, and I think Eli nails it. We're all on Instagram, I don't know how many times a day now, and like you walk into a building and it's just like, wait, I know you. Right. And, who do I know you from? And everyone's like, Instagram. So tell us about this process and like a little bit about the Vermont Growers Association and what triggered you to think of this.
Absolutely. So first of all, again, thank you, Joe. This is awesome. Really appreciate the opportunity. It's really exciting to be here. It's exciting for us to be doing this, to be collaborating with Eli. Jenny and I started the Vermont Growers Association almost a year ago now, and it really was a response into, as we were sort of watching what was happening in our state. And I think that, the sentiments that we sort of had were echoed and shared throughout lots of our friends, our families, our neighbors. We were kind of just left scratching our heads like, hey, what's going on? We're seeing our representatives, our state senators, the people that we're electing to serve and represent us, left sort of bewildered about how to approach legalizing cannabis in our state. And, whether it's information or education or special interests. We were just watching basically these things go down in Montpelier, and we were like, wait a minute, maybe, we should have a voice in there. And so, naturally, one of the things that we did was, look at other states. And we're not trying to invent the wheel here. We look at the West Coast. We've got lots of sister organizations now since we've started this. And what we mean by that is basically we're just organizations we've reached out who are doing similar things to what we want to do. And that basically is state level and county level advocacy. And some of those sister organizations would be the Humboldt County Growers Alliance, the Oregon Cannabis Association, and there's a handful of others out there. And these are organizations that are doing really effective work. They're not just sort of having parties and getting people together and having a good time. They're actually listening to their constituents. They're listening to their growers, their hash makers, these talented individuals who maybe, have been in the shadows for a while. Like myself. This is, as Eli alluded to, this is like a transitional, transformative moment in time in our country, and in our state especially. We've grown cannabis for a long time. Right now, Jen and I are, registered patients and caregivers. So we're authorized for the state, and we follow the law, and but we still do our own thing. And we just wish that, Vermont was maybe a little bit more explorative and innovative, as we see other states doing. So that's kind of one reason why I wanted to get involved.
You want to share the Instagram handle and let them all see the heat?
So I am VMR Caregiver 17 on Instagram. I'm not on social media at all, really, but Instagram is my only thing. I think, as we all know, there's a pretty vibrant cannabis community on Instagram, and so you'll be able to see some of our medical plants and some of our work on that page. And yeah, so, that's kind of what we are. So it was a process for us to kind of come out of the shadows. And as we do that, we're also trying to, bring some of our friends, family, and neighbors out of the shadows as well, because we want to make sure that we have a piece of this pie. We've all sort of seen some of the good and bad things that have happened in other states. So let's just make sure that we can do it as best as we can in this state. So that's really some of the overall sort of driving motivation behind VGA.
Nice. So, have you been in Vermont?
Yep.
Your whole life?
No. So I moved up here for college in 2000. So I've been up here for a couple decades now. Been cultivating for a couple decades as well. And just, happened to have lucky enough to find a job sort of after college and stick around. My day job with Jenny is we run the Latch Creative Company. It is a design and marketing firm. We actually have some clients in the cannabis space. They mostly are on the West Coast. But we do also actually we do a lot of political action committee work as well. So for our day job, we sort of do a lot of what we're trying to do in the cannabis space. So there was kind of a natural extension for us between strategizing, public affairs, communications, design, and marketing, and sort of bringing that over to as resources to help jumpstart and get this little movement going with Eli and Jenny.
And I think that was a big thing, for me, getting to know these guys and actually starting to see some of their work, because it's always like, we have to organize. You got to have a website, logo, outreach, all these materials. These guys already had, their work is amazing, and seeing their stuff. And then knowing that they had the experience and understanding of kind of how other political action committees work and how campaigns work, and this idea, because we are, to be clear, this is a nonprofit organization. We are a political action committee. As of right now, we're not actively raising money. That will hopefully come at some point.
Yes.
We're looking at a very basic, two-tier model: individuals, businesses,
Now, can people become a member?
Totally.
Are there membership opportunities here?
Absolutely. We have a mailing list. Please, if you're listening, check out our website at vermontgrowers.org. And right now, there's two easy buttons. There is a button to take our survey, which we'll dive into, and then there's also the button to join our mailing list. So Eli alluded to being able to receive financial contributions. Our goal is to have that set up by the end of September. So by that time, we will be communicating with everyone out there about membership and then what it takes to get involved, and then what also we'll be offering the community directly.
Awesome. And that's why we did this. We started this in this order intentionally because we have this survey, right? So we're not going to, this isn't like we're coming in here, this is what we got to do, this is why, this is the right idea, come get on board. We have to say, hey, we want to represent the community, and we need to, so we need to hear from you. Is 500 square feet the right number? Can we take, instead of canopy, say flowering canopy? We need to get people's input, and we need to kind of build this coalition. And again, we want to recruit board members, and sort of continue to organize along that side too. So we're really kind of prioritizing the outreach and saying, again, we got big issues, and I think a lot of it's going to come down to the timeline of how we want to see regulation rolled out, and what licensing might look like, and how people, if, how, and when people are going to be able to participate.
I mean, there are a lot of questions, even around S54, which we were talking about before. And you just nailed a great question, which I tend to go back and forth with, especially with the Vermont law. Is it, do we do canopy size? Is it flowering canopy, or do we do plant counts? Because, if we want to do plant counts, I can make a big plant. You know what I mean?
Or tax per square foot, and let people do whatever size it is. But
and what model are we following?
We look at, here's one right now. Look at S54. How does that really incorporate outdoor? I don't think that's really so. Is there going to be a separate license for outdoor or for sun-grown? Shout out to my friend at Mountain Fire Farms who brought this up, and he's like, I want to do sun-grown, high-quality greenhouse, and then outdoor. I don't necessarily want the same kind of license, or if you get a license for 500 square feet indoor, do you get, 1,500 square feet outdoor?
And can they be combined in essence, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of stuff that we don't want to kind of just make it up. We want to hear from people because we know, that's how this works, and that's what's been missing in kind of the movement is let's get all the ideas, let's get all the energy, let's kind of talk about them, and then let's organize and get it out there and say, all right, price is important of what these licenses cost, but we got to make sure there's a deadline on when they're issued, too.
Right.
How do the first 50 people get selected? Is it the first people to apply? Is it a raffle? Do we do it by area? A lot of that stuff is probably more detailed than the legislature is going to consider, but we got to know where people are at, and people know where we're at. So radical transparency. That's the idea with this lobbying.
You must have seen a lot of this before being in the State House during this last session, right? You were there. There's a lot of these questions, and there's a lot of these misconceptions, I think, because a lot of the education really isn't there. The Senate was a great panel because they listened, right? They were really interactive. They listened. They actually put the work in. They did some research. But like you said, there's a lot of these little questions that kind of held up the bill. You know what I mean? Is there dispensary involvement? Do they get a head start? Is it that? Is it this? And it's a big bill that, a lot of us, I think, were split last year when we the dispensaries got involved. So a lot of us were like, no, that can't go through. A lot of us were like, no, go through and fix it later. And, you were there, right?
Right. And I think that's a lot of frustration, and that's kind of where talking to the community and people who are advocates and who want to advocate and help move things forward, that we also have to and will communicate, look, here's what's going on, here's what we're going to choose our battles, and kind of here's how they're going to probably deal with that issue, so I think just communicating that, because people are asking how much is it going to cost? How much is it going to cost?
Right, that's a big thing, right?
How big, whatever. And honestly, if the bill we have right now, we have no idea. It just kind of punts that to this commission. Some people like the idea of having this small commission, 3 people, 5 people, because it's easier to maybe lobby 3 or 5 people. It makes it a much less transparent process, and there's not really accountability. So I don't know if it's great to give kind of giving this commission all this power and control. I think it's going to be really important to think about how we interact with it. And I think Massachusetts has done a great job with that. It seems like they have evolved and really reacted.
Yeah, they react fast, though. That's a great thing about Mass.
I mean, it's like exactly. And so it's same thing. I think we've been so wrong to we've been so afraid of not getting it perfect that it's like, look, there's going to be issues. We're going to have to oh, snap, we got to hire an extra, 5 people to review applications because we just got 100 of them dropped off and nobody took into that, that into account, or, zoning issues. So I think right now, where we're at is, we want to try to get as much of the good stuff locked into the legislation as we can, and then think about, all right, we're going to continue to be a force, so that way when that commission does exist, the Growers Association is going to be lobbying them as well.
Now, the Growers Association, do you guys plan on writing up your own agenda, basically? Your own proposal?
Not just agenda, but legislation.
It's just,
So I would say some of the tenets of PACs and what we choose to actually engage as well is actual legislation. As we know, we love our legislators, but most of the time these days they're basically, things are handed to them. They're given options. Their aides are, advising them on the best course of action. Sure, things change. We're familiar with the sausage making process, but part of this frustration and why, we came to be is because we want to make sure that when legislators in our state have options on their desk, that one of those options is written by the people, is written by us. So we are. Yep. So not only will we be actually drafting legislation, and we've started that process because the summertime is the opportune time for a PAC to do that, but we're also going to be directly getting engaged with races and elections. As a PAC, that's something that we can do that's unique as a 501c4. And so we're going to be doing that sort of engagement with actual races as well. So in addition to lobbying, and one thing that I wanted to touch upon that's really, really important is messaging, information, and education for our elected officials. Right now, none of that's happening. So we're going to be dropping leaflets. We're going to be using Eli to, we're going to be drafting accurate, realistic representations of what cannabis is, and handing that out to politicians and really bringing them up to the level that their constituents are at when it comes to awareness, when it comes to, frankly, what's right and wrong when it comes to the plant.
And that's
huge for us.
100. I mean, because it is like from seeing the inside, the sausage, and seeing how it's seasoned and made, same thing. We got to have somebody on our side. we got to have somebody doing it. And the same thing with that information, because you do see it in the mailbox every week. All those representatives, they get messages from constituents, but there's also a dude who's printing out, 20 pages of Yahoo News articles, and every single week putting it in those mailboxes. So we know that we have, again, the truth on our side, most importantly, and all the tools at our disposal to do that. So I think that's kind of the benefit of even let's start having this anti-propaganda.
Exactly.
I mean, we need anti-propaganda and information. So that's where, being able to put kind of hopefully our creative skills together and share stuff is going to be and it's going to be a fun opportunity too, because the truth out there, good people use cannabis,
I mean, you guys are patients as well. So, I mean, we can go in that whole discussion here in a few minutes about the dispensary systems, patients advocacy here in Vermont. We'll talk about Vermont because, there's been a lot of ups and downs and issues at hand, and then a lot of people love the system. So, I mean, you guys are great to talk to because it's like, what do you guys think about these issues? What do you guys personally think? Because, I mean, we all have an opinion here, right? We also have Jenny here in the studio.
I was going to say, Jen, right? the mysterious Jenny, a.k.a. Gen X. This is actually, she's a patient, so this is a good time.
Oh.
Hi, folks.
How you doing, Jenny?
Good, how are you?
So, a little bit about yourself real quick.
Similar to Jeff, I came up to Vermont in 2000. Went to school, stuck around, been in the marketing business world, been a patient for about 10 years now in the system. Chose to grow our own since you had to make a decision between the dispensaries and doing it yourself for a long time up until last year, and so never participated in the dispensary system at all. and that's pretty much where I'm coming from in that regard.
Right. But now, let's talk about patient real quick. This is something I always ask for patients. It's like, does it work for you? Because there's a lot of people out there on the fence about using cannabis, right, as an alternative, right? Mm-hmm. There's still a lot of stigmas, and there's people still in a lot of trouble for treating themselves or kids. Like, we see the lady at Walt Disney World. We see parents losing their kids to things. But as a patient, how does it work for you? Just real quick.
Like nothing else.
Like nothing else, right?
Nothing can take the place of it, or do as good of a job.
Is there any recommendation you give to any other patients that are tuned in right now that are potentially thinking about making that switch? Like any sort of advice? Because I think the biggest thing that we always hear is people get, like I get anxious. There's all these like little things that people have to worry about. For us, we try educate people on strains and that kind of a knowledge. But as a patient, I guess.
How do you find your right strain?
Yeah, how do you go about getting your medicine? I mean, you guys are making it, right?
Right. I mean, I would say if you're trying to transition, maybe start with CBD. It'll take the anxiety element out of it and probably help if that's an issue for you. But I only smoke indicas for the most part. I avoid hybrids, maybe like pure sativas every once in a while, but mostly just straight indicas.
Yeah.
And that kind of rules that out for the most part.
Now, for you, are you medicating with THC or CBD mainly?
Probably one, equal.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little bit more CBD lately. Depends on the amount of pain management that's happening at the moment. THC helps more for that, but overall CBD all the time, and THC occasionally as needed.
I mean, that seems to be the next big push now is medical THC access, I guess you could say, because not every state has it. I mean, here in Vermont we do, right? We have a good caregiver system that works right now. I mean, could it be better? I believe it could be expanded, right? Which would greatly benefit Vermont. Now, being a patient in Vermont, it's not that hard, right? How do you guys feel about some of the restrictions on being a patient, though?
You mean in order to get the card, or?
Well, to get the card, or for just the laws of being a patient in Vermont, you can only use one dispensary. You know what I mean? There's certain fees. I mean, there's a lot of people that ask me, we were just discussing outside. Do I have my card personally? I said no. I
will say this. When we, Jen and I kind of followed the cusp of. We've been following similar to Eli and lots of others, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
We've been sort of following what's been happening in Montpelier for a while, right? So when Bill 76 passed in 2004 with Jim Douglas, we were around and we followed that. Come 2007 and the development of the dispensaries and all of this stuff, we watched this evolve and when we jumped into it head first, it was different than how it is now. And one of the things that we've sort of been doing on the side is actually we've had people come to us, friends, family, coworkers, maybe, who are like, "Hey, I'm thinking about this. How do I get involved? What's best?" And lots of times, I hate to say it, but we recommend and we have done consulting with helping people set up their own little grows, totally legal, totally safe. And that really allows them to manage the efficacy and also the safety of the medicine that they're taking. Mm-hmm. We have an active medical market, and we have, I've been to some of the dispensaries where our offices are actually downtown in Burlington, right above Champlain Valley Dispensary. And so, we've been down there. We're familiar with all of these people. It is a very probably overly tightly regulated system. We wish things were a little bit more relaxed, more options, higher quality medication. If I had to say, just a guess, most of the registered patients and caregivers grow their own or prefer to grow their own rather than acquire from a dispensary at this point in time in Vermont. And we wish that was the reverse. Yeah. We wish there was a better, more competitive marketplace out there.
And I'll give a shout out to them, and to those advocates. Like you said, things have come so far. 2004, Mark Tucci, the Vermont homegrown people who were my introduction. I was still in high school, seeing these people, very clearly sick people testifying for their right to use this as medicine. So, we don't take that for granted at all. And everybody, especially Southern Vermont, just a lot of the old school patients. and rest in peace to Shane. Star Farm, that was one of the first original cases that we heard and thought, how crazy is this that's happening? So, we're not here today without the work that, and again, the dispensaries as well have done as far as advocating, bringing patients in, making delivery a possibility, making dispensaries a possibility. For a long time, there was a cap on 1,000 patients. Like Vermont could control only 1,000 sick people.
That's it.
Only having that many people. So, we have to keep in mind, and especially, I'm 31, kind of millennial. Things change really fast and want instant gratification. It's a long way, and there are still people in jail in other states for doing what now is totally legal and what is extremely profitable, and even some of those same states. So we don't take that for granted, and I think that it has been the medical program from being in the State House. I don't think people really understand what the dispensaries are up against, and people say, why don't we have caregiver laws like they have in Maine? Or why don't we have, I've interviewed Shane, from CVD, and him saying on record 2 years ago, they'd love to buy cannabis from individual growers and independent growers. We haven't been able to make that happen in Montpelier, for a lot of reasons. But the medical, trying to get medical reform changed in Vermont is really hard, and comes down to like one committee, 3 or 4 people, and it's just not like the caregiver allowance thing. It's been tried and keep hitting that brick wall, and then people kind of shift. So there is a really good medical bill that's on the wall right now. I think it's 117 maybe, that does allow for almost any other condition, and does allow for some expansion and loosens the noose a little bit on the dispensaries. Because, and again, out there we have to think, these are all, everybody who works there, everybody who's in this community we're still like the 5% of people who care about this plant the most in the greater society, right? So, and I have so many good friends, who have worked, in the dispensaries, who do, and like being an employee there, it takes a lot. Yep. You have to be really passionate about it to go do that. So,
there's a stigma. There's still stigmas everywhere you turn, whether you're in the medical field, whether it's like you guys as patients or growers, you know what I mean, in a new cannabis business. We see it from everywhere, from social media to friends and family to doctors and other issues. Guys, we have to take a quick break right now. It's 12:30. We're going to put you guys over to Brandon Barberio. He has our special strain of the week this week. If you guys want to give us a call and say something to somebody, get a question, a comment, a concern based around cannabis, all you got to do is, again, give us a call here at the studio, and we'll give you some airtime. 802-454-7762, and we're going to get over to our strain of the week. Hold on here 1 second. Strain of the week with Brandon Barberio.
I'm Brandon Barberio, your cannabis expert for In the Weeds Prohibition Talk Radio on WGDR. This week's strain of the week is the Lottie Dottie. The Lottie Dottie is a sativa-dominant hybrid strain, and its unknown origins are due to a high level of breeder secrecy and its overall rarity in the cannabis market. But after you feel the effects of this 23% THC bomb, any sativa lover will instantly be hooked. The high is almost immediate after the first exhale, and it is a quick rush to an uplifting cerebral energy, and it leaves you happy beyond the reason of happy and heavy, without the heaviness type feeling, but yet numbs your mind very pleasantly. And as your energy builds, you'll become more and more creative, making things very easy and very happy. Because of these powerful head-heavy highs, the Lottie Dottie is a perfect choice for patients who suffer from chronic fatigue, nausea, depression, and chronic stress. This bud has a super fresh and fruity flavor like a tropical flower, and it is sweet with a honey aftertaste. However, it does have a little bit of sour mixed into it, and the aroma is very pungent. It's earthly with tropical hints, a very sweet urge, and a tangy-like sour feeling. The Lottie Dottie's buds are very airy and forest green. They're orange hairs, and they come with a thick covering of nice white crystals. Once again, I'm Brandon Barberio, your cannabis expert for In the Weeds Prohibition Talk Radio on WGDR.
All right, we are back. Lottie Dottie. That's
Yeah.
Is that like Snoop's favorite cannabis? Because it's in one of the songs, isn't it?
Like it said, it's the secret recipe. I mean, I really dug kind of pretty hard. It's got to have, I mean, I would just assume it's got to have something to do with them, but, like, they won't release the information. I can't find it anywhere. Like, there wasn't even, like, sometimes they'll give you one of the crosses out of the couple that they do to get it there, and they were like, nope. Couldn't find anything. No. And there's so many new strains that are just hitting, like, wait till you see. I found one. Oh, man, next week it's going to be crazy. I was like, this is
Brandon,
real.
have you runs your life
like,
up?
You just see the name, and it's like Cryptochronicunalite. And I'm like, what? This is real? Come on.
You know, so Brandon does a strain of the week for us every week, and a lot of people, you know, most of our listeners know, some people don't. You know, Brandon joins us from Arizona every week, so he brings us these strains. I'm like, dude, I've never even heard of this on the West Coast. And he's like, oh, it's a great West Coast or an East Coast weed, you know. And I'm like,
Dude, the Instagram stuff is just a whole other world.
Yeah,
I could do like an entire show on just Zach Woods.
Right.
Like, just watching that stuff, like the creativity, dude, like the sticker trappers out there, the meme market makers, it is outrageous. That's why I was saying the runts your life up thing, dude. Like, I still can't tell if the whole thing is like just tongue in cheek or if it's real. That's why it's amazing. That's why it's like, you know, you give people a little bit of space and let them cook and let all this awesome creativity, come out.
And it's really interesting when you get into like different states too, because you know each state kind of has their local variety. Each state does its own thing. Each state has like its own stigma released. You know what I mean? So like town or state, like when we're in Worcester for a show, it's we're all consuming on the sidewalk. And
right.
Everybody's bringing their own little kind of thing that they're growing. It's all different from what we have going up here. You know what I mean? So
well, I guess that's the question, you know, and then we'll see where genetic testing comes in. And I'm sure Brandon has a take on this. Like, you know, can I just make my own strain? You know, and like, if so, how much do I have to do to it to make it its own
like your own
thing,
strain,
right? Yeah, exactly. If I'm like, all right, you know, I want to make Vermonter one as a strain, you know, or I'm going to make some Mark Tucci headband, or you know, so whatever it is, you know, like how much do you have to breed it, you know, until it's its own thing, or is it just if you tell people it's something and it's like, this is now called runts instead of gelato, like, you know.
Well, it happens all the time.
Well, that's the problem with the industry, though.
There's two ways to answer it, right? Because you could do it by pheno, really. You could grow out probably 5 to 6 generations of pheno, or you could do it by literally, and this is the big thing with hybrid. Like, here's a good example. I found this strain called Cronut, okay? And I'm like, what? And it's Girl Scout cookie crossed with Sin City Kush. Now, those are both amazing strains, but the only way that they were going to be able to get that specific strain was literally to create it that way, if you will. So, I mean, now, if you're the person that did that, why not? Hey, it's the Eli Harrington, or, you know, like a variation of something off of that plays off of that, but at least everyone would know it was you. Right. And I agree. I mean...
Yeah, but now you had companies like Phylos, right? I mean, unfortunately, they did a kind of a big awkward thing here recently, as most growers know, because you know you map your genetics, right? So like a lot of these guys can actually send in these genetics that you're talking about now and basically make their claim to this genetic, right? Name it, put it in the galaxy somewhere, right?
No pun intended.
Right, but you nailed it on the head. I think I know personally how many times I go to really good growers that I know and really well respect. I'm like, so what's this? He's like, I don't know. I'm going to call it monkey breath. I found it on the floor. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was like one of those weird deals. And you're like, what the heck? So, I mean, I think with someone like that, like, you know, the Phylos Galaxy thing was a great idea at the beginning, right? Because it really...
Man. And I think a lot of these labs, you know, like I think UVM's going to be doing it. I saw, you know, BIA Diagnostics coming online saying they're going to do genetic testing. Because I've never talked to a grower who hasn't mentioned that, you know, that they would like that. They want to know what they have.
Right.
You know, and I do think that is what was so cool about the Galaxy, which I do think is still out there.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a lot of stuff on there. And, you know, even that, it's like, that kind of business model of, you know, find who has unique genetics, contact them, you know, license those genetics, like stabilize them and license them. Like that's what that's what High Mowing Seeds does here in Vermont. Right. You know, that's what Monsanto does. You know, that's like how agricultural business, you know, works. So it's going to be interesting. That's another one of these transition things, you know, to see, because I know a lot of people are like, I really want to get it tested, but I'm scared.
Right.
You know, and it's like, well, I don't think they can't. I don't know. We'll have to get somebody with more scientific understanding, because as I understand, you can't reverse engineer genetics out of, you know, if I send a sample in someplace for genetic testing,
Well,
you know, like.
Well, they can with the DNA of the plant.
Yeah,
that's why this whole Phylos thing is sparking the outrage it has, because
that's why the whole
collected the DNA.
Monsanto thing's so huge too. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, so, you know, sexing is not, you know, it's not anything new in the cannabis in the farming field, right? And that's basically what Phylos did. And there's lots of other services that are out there, but really, when they hit the scene, they basically like, hey guys, not only can we offer the services that everyone else can do, but we have this pharmaceutical grade lab. We have a genome sequencer. We have these systems that really were blowing away and was overkill for your traditional cannabis breeder. And that kind of got some people scratching their heads. So some of the people that we speak to on the left coast, you know, they've got, you know, it's real tumultuous. There's people who did business with Phylos, and there are people who, you know, held off out of hesitation, and so it's a very mixed bag right now. And I hate to say it, but there's lots of people who are also kind of, you know, thinking about things like lawsuits. Intellectual property is huge. That's one of the most fascinating things from me personally about what's happening in our country. I think that, you know, not to be too sort of cheesy about it, but, you know, for the longest time, you know, if you wanted to grow, you really need to get, and I'm talking, you know, 10, 20 years ago, you really need to know someone in this country, or you basically were getting things from Amsterdam.
Yeah,
everything
you're flying around, getting certain cuts and bringing it back.
Mark Emery in Canada, we were looking outside of the U.S., so it was really just like a crapshoot. Like, what are we getting here?
You're walking down the side of the road, and you see a beautiful plant in some other country, and you don't know what that
exactly. So what we've seen over the past, 5-10 years is these American companies coming out of the woodwork. These people who are, you know, have developed our most favorite strains over the past handful of years, and in effect, that's intellectual property. You know, as rubber hits the road and this becomes more of a legal framework, that's where a lot of these people are turning. And so Phylos is a real sort of you know, a pebble in people's shoe. Maybe they saw something before other people, but it's dicey. There's two sides of every story, but we're not we're for transparency and full disclosure. So you know, take that with a grain of salt.
No, I mean, I hope that Vermont really goes to like more of a biotech, like THC log type system. I mean, I know that the third-party testers are really starting to kind of open and just get everything together. And if there's a central computer that everyone can log into, then what would happen is all the third-party testers would literally be able to create a periodical cannabis table for Vermont specifically. So you guys would know what is the best actual strains, who's growing them, where they're coming from, and the whole 9 yards. And what that would do is that would literally weed out everything else that's kind of the BS that everyone's talking about but doesn't have the facts to back it up, if you will. And the easy key to this, hopefully, is, and we all know this, a lot of people don't get cannabis tested, even though it's required, because of the cost. So I'm really hoping that there can kind of be like a happy medium where the labs are like, okay, you know, if, like, for instance, if you only had, let's say, a farm that was 1,000 acres, hopefully the cost is a lot lower for someone that's operating on that level as opposed to someone that will be operating on a level of, like, 100,000 acres. You know what I mean? Or, like, vice versa, whether it was indoor or outdoor. So that's really important because the education and the transparency and the testing, the third-party testing is the most important thing in any regulatory system, hands down. Those are the businesses that make the phone call and they go, True Harvest, listen, we're really sorry, guys, but you lost $25 million out of your $150 million crop you just harvested because it had mold in it. It tested bad. We have to torch it. Have a nice day. Click. Like, these happen every single day. But that's what's keeping people safe in these regulated products. You know what I mean? How many times are we seeing article after article, Joe, of these fake cartridges are trying, you know, like killing people, and people are mimicking all this stuff because they can just buy all this stuff online and fill it with whatever and put it out on the street.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big
important.
issue we talk about all the time. And all week long I get messages from people, and I probably had 10 messages this week alone because people are seeing these stories, and they're like, wait, I bought these cartridges, well, $20 a piece down the road last week. And
right.
You're like, you know, and what blows my mind is in any market, you always get what you pay for, right? Mm-hmm. Any market, you know what I mean? You want a Ford Escort? It's a different price than a Rolls Royce. You know what I mean? You want a filet mignon or do you want a chuck steak? Right. It's a different price. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you know, unless we're talking about big pharma, you know what I mean, which is the different issue. Like, you know, price markups are for reasons in most cases.
I think it's that's to Brandon's point, the testing thing.
Yeah. But is that is that still a safe bet though? Because now, you know, just like carts, we see a lot of issues with these testing facilities being paid.
Well, all this is like one big long ad for Trace. Right. Shout out to Trace for tracking.
I was going to go there next.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, the you know, that's even blockchain enabled. So yeah, those guys are rocking it. That's a cool platform. I think.
That's why I mentioned biotech. Sorry, not to cut you off, because that's that blockchain system. Yeah. And it's full transparency. So if everybody has access to that, he's absolutely right. It would be an amazing tracking system. Right. No one can defraud anything.
And they're marking this stuff too now in some areas.
Well, here's where I think with the testing it becomes kind of complicated, right? And where I get a little nervous is starting to go too far down the road of cannabis is dangerous, right? Because that's not a narrative that I believe is true in the scope of society, you know, and that's not one that I want to agree with our opponents and start saying, well, I mean, so yes, like street cartridges for sure have to be careful. And, you know, honestly, we need to start just getting some funds together and independently testing them, you know, and just having a thing where you can drop stuff off and have it tested. Testing's expensive. Can be expensive too, right? I mean, so we're seeing we now have, I think, this company, you know, BIA, who I mentioned before, come online, who they're just doing testing. Yep. All the other labs in Vermont, you know, are extractors who also do testing. You know, and a lot of them
are single cannabis labs where BIA is a well-known and established food testing.
Which I could see both sides of that argument. You know, you want a cannabis lab testing cannabis, or you want a food, whatever. Either way, you know, there's going to be more testing capacity out there for people. And, you know, we got to think about where the rubber meets the road on testing for medical. Incredibly important. The fact that we don't have third-party testing, like if you have a card, if you have a compromised immune system, then you need to know that your meds are clean, and you need to trust that. And whether it's because you trust your caregiver, you know, or because you have independently tested stuff that you're buying at a dispensary or getting delivered to you, like, you have to have that. And I give shout out to Grassroots Vermont, you know, who do voluntarily do third-party testing and pay their competition to test their stuff because they realize how important that is. You know, so
especially in our Vermont market of late, where we've had a lot of
Vermont,
questionable.
it's not required. So it's like when we talk about testing.
Why is that?
I think that is. Well, I mean, I think that's something we need to think about explicitly for medical. But then, you know, we have people who say, you know, as growers, and say, look, I want to do farm stand. You know, I want to be able to do direct sales. You know, look, we're a ways away from farm stand, but you know, if at my Airbnb, or I want to have an event, You
That's
know,
just,
like
there should be just a
clean,
license.
I grow
shouldn't it, though?
clean cannabis, but
Right.
well, if it costs $500 a pound, you know, to get your testing done, because we're over regulating it, because you know now it becomes so expensive that only huge companies can afford to do that. You know what I
Right.
mean? So we got to find that balance, and like, all right, if people are
Yep.
growing, you know, with living soil and micro, you know, and they're failing all their microbe tests. Like, is that the right kind of system? So the testing thing is going to be delicate. And
We need to know.
you know, I think a lot of the hemp, I think they're figuring a lot of it out with the hemp program right now. And, you know, the Agency of Agriculture, you know, working really hard and bringing new staff on. So I think ideally, you know, and we put this out in our survey. What a great setup, Joe. Thanks. You know, who do people want who should be overseeing these programs within the state of Vermont? You know, and I think the leadership that the Agency of Agriculture, and this is a commissioner appointed by a Republican governor, you know, mind you. So, you know, really give them a lot of credit, right? Governor who vetoed THC. So give them a lot of credit for how they're taking leadership on thinking about setting up this testing program for hemp, and then hopefully being able to apply that for THC cannabis, and thinking about the same thing with grower registrations. You know, we saw, like, it's kind of a nice win for government functioning when you see we go from 97 from 16 to 97 to 500 to 800 permits, right, each year. And we see an office actually keep up with it. Now, they were a little late getting the paperwork out this year, you know, but that's all right. And actually keeping up. So, like, we know if we can license 820 hemp farmers in the state of Vermont
Very easily, too.
with locations, you know, with GPS locations of their grow and descriptions of it, and we're going to test that, you know, we're going to document it. I bet we could probably license that many THC growers, too, right? Okay, do we need to hire 5 more employees for the Agency of Agriculture? All right, let's do that. Let's get this, you know, let's start to make these licenses available and start to get some of these funds in. So,
Well, let me ask you a couple of questions, Eli.
Yeah.
Now we have you here. You brought up a couple great points of where I have questions. Who oversees this commission? Who oversees this new agency? Who oversees the cannabis control? Is it like Mass where there's a board made? Is it the Department of Ag, right? Is it the DOJ, which we're kind of there now, right? So it's the policing.
yeah, right
An
now,
industry,
I mean,
right?
well, you know, that's a good point. Anything would be better than the status quo, where the Department of Public Safety are overseeing medical cannabis, right? So any change is better than that. Can't not say that. Have to say that. And that's not to take a shot at the individuals who work there, but it's just anathema to what they do. You know, they've been under-resourced, and I think they'd probably be happy to get rid of it.
Right.
To get rid of it. But
Well, I mean, it's a big take on, though. I mean, we're in the state house. They're like asking like how many people, who takes it on. Like Massachusetts is a great example of. You know, there's a large board there, and they're continuously working every day to, like we were talking about before, right these regulations or right the wrongs or make sure things get handled swiftly, right? If there's an issue in Mass today, tomorrow it's getting taken care of. If there's an issue in Vermont right now today, can we expect anything within a year? You know what I mean? When we have some of these issues, because it always gets kicked back to.
Well, this is a question. You know, this is where it's like. What happens inside the State House versus the reality and common sense of what happens, like with this issue. That question of how many people are on this commission. You know, are there 3 people or are there 5 people?
Right.
Right? And this commission, what salary are they going to be paid? You know, and then the political question of who gets to appoint the members of this commission.
Right.
You know, so the governor, the president of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, maybe somebody from the Department of Health, maybe somebody from the Department of Taxes, maybe somebody from the Agency of Agriculture, you know, right? So that's a big question that is internally kind of contentious and has nothing to do with any of us who are like, cool, when are the licenses available and how much? Like, shut up and take my money, you know.
We get to work.
But this is kind of, again, like the sausage making and why stuff takes a while. And you know, I mean, again, the question is, in Vermont, how are you going to find, right, this is, again, just unfortunately to rain on people's parades of how long this is probably going to take to make reality. Like, we got to find these 5 people who are not experts in cannabis but competent enough to do this job, right? Pay them whatever it's going to be. I think it's around like $80,000 a year, full state benefits.
Build that budget
Pretty
for them.
sick. Yeah, exactly. We got to raise that money too, right? Find that somewhere from licenses or, you know, maybe a huge fine on a dispensary.
Which was a big question last term, right?
Who knows? Right,
money,
where does
the
money
roadside
come from?
testing.
So we got to do all that. Like, we got to find the office and put the phones in and set up the email accounts of people that we haven't yet hired who are then going to review these licenses. You know, so part of what we need to do is move that process faster and faster and say, look, we got to pass this bill by March. So that way on town meeting day, the first Tuesday in March, we can go to each of our respective towns and find out how smart or stupid we really are. And if we're going to ban these businesses, what type, at least let people start planning and start having that discussion. You know, and then, again, being a presence on whatever commission is formed. You know, we're not going to have any control over that. And then the commission would hire an executive director, you know, and then an administrator. And, like, guess what? That's kind of who I care about more, is are there enough people to pick up the phones and to review these applications? Right? Yeah, because if it takes 6 months to get your application reviewed, you know, what is that going to do for your timeline? You know, and maybe if it's the wrong 6 months. And so, you know, I would rather have, like I said, I don't care as much about if the governor appoints. I mean, I do. This is a governor who's been consistently, you know, kind of opposed to this. But the people who I think are answering the phones, you know, the people who are reviewing the applications, I think those are almost more important. So for me, it's more about let's get this thing funded, you know, let's get it set up, and let's make sure we have some transparency built in, because this would be like an executive board within an agency, and these people doing like 2 or 3 year terms, right? So once the legislature passes a bill, if we don't like something, you know, we're going to the commission. Right. You know, the legislature's not going to, and a lot of advocates, I think, argue that this is better, that this commission could make changes faster, like they've done in Massachusetts. Like, yeah, well, it's also, you know, 5 people operating in a bubble, you know, in a back, you know, it's like the smaller those rooms get, right, exactly, and the quieter those conversations get, the less transparent, the less, you know, accessible or equal of a process it is. And so that's kind of, like I said, our part of our core, you know, mission is equal access for people to participate. And that, again, means that, you know, let's say these small cultivator license, we're talking about a $500, you know, for 500 square feet. You know, the math is easy, right? All right, so let's add another 500 and say 500 hours. Within 500 hours, you have a license decision made. Now, you've had to go do all this work up front, talk to your town, you know, figure out location, all this stuff. But that we build that into the legislation, and so we can kind of make sure that whoever's in charge of these things, we've got protection in the bill that makes sure this system's going to run functionally. We're going to save these people from themselves by having such a functional bill that's thought out. You know, and same thing with the testing. Yeah. Like, if you look at the timeline of the bill right now, you know, there's an opportunity for integrated licenses. You know, those are dispensaries who would be vertically integrated from day one. Right. Well, guess what? They're still going to need supply. Right, exactly. And they would not be required to do testing. Now, we'd start taking testing applications and, you know, cultivator applications right at the same time, right? But I think if we think about what do we want as a growers association, we want to make sure that we've got growers licensed first. So guess what? Bad news, you know, because we took this extra time to have these conversations, we don't have that legal supply, you know, and so we talk about avoiding common mistakes in other states. Like, what's going to happen when there's a line down around the corner in Brattleboro at the co-op, jamming up downtown Brattleboro, and there's no herb, you know, and patients don't have any bud, and parking, you know, and in the meantime, you know, gray market, illicit market's absolutely crushing it. You know, just hang out in the parking lot. You know what I mean? So
hopefully your Vermont dispensary has a representative who has a wholesale license from Oregon, and then they just start shipping pods from their 350 million metric tons of cannabis direct to your dispensary, so you can DSC, direct medical quality products that are already tested, sourced, and labeled through your biotech system for public sale. But that's just logic.
Right. I mean, we've talked about, you know, what Oregon's done with the export license. Like, yeah, not relevant right now, but when it is, let's be ready to go day one.
Yeah. I mean,
you know, let's be ready to cook and say, all right, let's do all this. Guess, you know, New York, New Jersey. I don't know if people have heard, they buy cannabis from Vermont sometimes, you know, and seem to like that. Let's do that legally, so that way when they're ready to go, we've got all of our growers have been licensed, and now everybody who's been that small mom and pop person serving tourists in the Airbnbs and all the legal markets that we will eventually have,
right?
They can kind of scale up and become medium-sized businesses, and start forming cooperatives and getting this stuff into these other markets legally. So, spot on, Brandon. Like, let's not use too much logic and efficiency here, right?
I do have one thing I want to ask you real quick. We got about a minute before the top of the hour here. And this is something that I'm bringing up to everybody. It's kind of like the question is going unnoticed, and people I don't know how they feel about it. Should the government have any sort of stipulations or regulations within the medical field, the recreational markets, or should they have anything? So, like, a lot of us are talking about how we need to decrim nationally, so just hand to the states, right? So I think it's a great idea from a recreational standpoint. I think it's a really bad idea from a medical standpoint where there's, we need some sort of government oversight. How do you guys feel about that? Which is kind of like what we're talking about in Vermont, where we don't have that board above the dispensaries saying, hey, you did something wrong, you're going to get penalized, or we're going to shut your doors down, or we're going to fine you, or you're going to grow illegal operations and violate your license, we're going to take your license away from you. Like, we see this out in California and Mass. You mess up, they take it from you. You know what I mean? The next day you're shut down, right? So
consequences, interesting.
Right, but like, I mean, 5 years ago, how you guys were talking about coming to Vermont. I mean, people are flying all over the country just to go to a state where they could get their 90% of it's like their kid get medicine, right? We last week, me and Brandon talked extensively about, because it was the Parents First Pot episode. It was like, these kids are getting taken away from their parents because they're trying on their last leg of cancer, they're terminally ill and they're trying CBD and they're getting, pulled away from their kids, you know what I mean? And then we see these kids take a sharp downfall when they're in the custody of the state because they're not getting their medicines, right? And we're talking about how well medicine works. And that's why it's important for us to talk to patients on our show, because a lot of patients talk to us, like, and Eli, right? They'll talk to us on the side, but try and get them in front of a microphone to share their experience.
Right.
It takes a lot, and we understand that. But, has any one of us ever been a patient once in our lives? You know what I mean? Or do we know somebody that's struggling with a cancer or something where THC can help? We're seeing a huge movement in sports now. You know what I mean?
Right.
You brought up a question earlier that I want to bring up to Tim, and I want to bring up to you, and Tim gets on the line here. We're going to take a break here in a minute and just do our calls here. But the question was, we're pushing for cannabis in sports, right? But now does it become a performance enhancement?
I mean, with what you're saying with the with the medical too, and like how much regulation is too much or not enough, right? It's hard because a lot of people have said all cannabis is medical, all cannabis is medicine. A lot of people treat it like that, a lot of people don't. The plant doesn't know if it's a recreational or a medical plant, right? It just has these properties, and how you use it is kind of up to you. So I think it comes down to, if you're going to have a medical program, and you're going to basically make people prove how sick they are to access this, they need to get benefit, higher, no taxes, which we're talking about, patients wouldn't pay tax.
Insurance support.
More access, to it. They can purchase more. They should be able to grow a lot more, have a better caregiver, get different products, and also expect it to be highly regulated, because you do want, like you said, the fact that you want, like, the fact that when have there been recalls? There's been one semi-voluntary recall.
Ontario, right?
But even like in Vermont, in the medical, like, recalls, that's good. That means regulation is working. So I think that if you've got the privilege to provide, and the trust to provide medical cannabis to people who are using it medically, that's got to be really highly regulated, because people need to have that same trust they have when they go to the doctor or when they go to the pharmacy, that whatever's in that little white, that little orange bottle is clean and controlled, and is what it
they
says
say.
it is.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? So, I think on the adult use side, much less. Like, for most people who are relatively healthy, smoking bad bud going to ruin your day, but it's not going to, probably kill you.
Right.
And when we talk about cannabis in the context of like alcohol or tobacco, Like, I mean, people, we see what's happening with vapes and, these respiratory issues caused by people addicted to Juuls and stuff. In the context, cannabis is still safer than all of it. So I don't even entertain that, cannabis is dangerous to the public argument. So I think that's kind of where it comes down for me. And it's like the recreational medical, it's all so subjective. If you're using it for anti-anxiety, is it medical? Who really gets to decide that? I think what's important is that you have access.
I saw a great meme today, right before we go to our break here, guys. It was, falling out of bed kills more people than cannabis every year. So, guys, we're going to take a quick break on that note. Don't go anywhere. We're going to come right back with Timothy Fair from Vermont Cannabis Solutions. We'll ask him a few of your law questions. If you guys want to give us a call, 802-454-7762. We'll get you into the studio. This is In the Weeds with Joseph Smith and Brandon Barberio. Don't go anywhere, guys.
Can you show me that password page again?
You're listening to In the Weeds Prohibition Talk Radio on WGDR 91.1 and WGDH 91.7.
So, Sarah, what's going on here? Sarah? Sarah.
She won't answer you. Or she can't.
Why not?
This is the way it's been since she started smoking pot. She's all lazy and boring and... we used to have so much fun together.
And now?
This is what we do.
Sometimes you catch that funky breeze. You're in the weeds.
All right, guys, and we are back. A quick little break with some fun little tunes there. We do have... We're going to take a step away from the Vermont Growers Association. It's great to have you guys on, Eli, Jeff, and Jenny. Again, you guys can find these guys at VermontGrowers.org, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you can find them there. There's a great survey going on, guys. So if you guys are concerned at all about Vermont politics when it comes to cannabis and you guys want to get your voices heard, here's a great way. There's a great way to reach out to these guys. There's a survey. You can get on the mailing list and you can reach out to these guys individually. I'm sure they'd love to talk to you and hear any sort of opinions you have on how we should structure our regulatory systems here in our rec markets and even in our medical fields, right? Because I think we all agree that changes need to be made all across the board. I think we can do better. And I think that, we're learning a lot the last few years with legalization happening all over the country and seeing where people are really excelling, where states are failing. A couple of great questions. We see articles all the time about how the hemp industry is going to have that boom. Everybody's throwing some seeds in the ground, you know what I mean? Stuff like that. But it's always great to have a place where we can politically meet, talk about our experiences and our needs, and then have somebody try to put something together and present it to the state. So, guys, check these guys out. Go to their website, fill out the survey, become part of the Vermont Growers Association. Right now, we have Timothy Fair from Vermont Cannabis Solutions. Timothy, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Joe. How you doing today, man?
It's been one of those weeks, man. We're glad to be here. As you know, we all know everybody in the room here. So we do have...
Hey, everybody.
Right? So, Timothy Fair. So how are we doing today, man? A couple quick questions popped up, and it was, again, over some grow issues. I did want to say congratulations on some of the cases that we had in Vermont recently that were thrown out, that we've talked about on the show. I'm glad to see some common sense finally prevailed, I believe. Is there something you want to touch about on those real quick, Tim? Or?
Well, just so far, we've been, we saw kind of this wealth of state-level marijuana prosecutions, and we've been doing pretty well in getting them either thrown out or getting them resolved for very minimal impact on the individuals, which is fantastic. I mean, I would like to see these things stop being brought against the citizens of the state. I think it's ridiculous, but we have had a lot of really good results. Recently in Bennington, a search warrant that was executed on a medical patient, which resulted in the seizure of allegedly 4 plants, which resulted in a felony charge, was recently completely dismissed after we filed some motions challenging it, which was nice to see. They folded their cards, realizing that we were right, which was very nice. Another couple cases up here in Chittenden County with, some cannabis cases that law enforcement spent a ridiculous amount of resources on. We were able to resolve for, probation sentences, fines, and very little else, which in my mind is still too much, but certainly better than, people being sent to jail for a harmless plant.
Right. I mean, well,
Doing the
congratulations.
Lord's work, Tim. Thank you.
But now we have this other issue this past week, which I've been waiting to ask you about all week, because, if anybody around your neighborhood, Tim, But so
this illustrates the difference between state and federal prosecutions.
Right.
And unfortunately, after about a year and a half of relative crickets from the federal government in cannabis in Vermont, we're now seeing a little bit more emphasis placed on cannabis prosecutions, which is very disheartening. But at the same time, we are going to vigorously fight and hopefully get the least amount of impact on our clients as possible.
Right. I mean, we're starting to see the feds kicking in a lot of different places, man.
Yep. It's starting to be a response, as we're seeing more and more states unwilling or, unable to pursue prosecutions for cannabis for various reasons, whether it's because hemp has been legalized and there's no means to test THC, or whether individual state prosecutors feel that this is a waste of resources, which it is. What we are starting to see, and this is happening in Texas, this is happening in Georgia, and this is now apparently to some level happening in Vermont, is the federal government stepping in and taking over those prosecutions. Which in my mind is both frustrating and significantly more challenging, given the federal government's position on cannabis, and is still listed as a Schedule I controlled substance, as we all know. That takes away quite a bit of our ability to challenge and fight these charges. But we've still got a few aces in our pockets that we may try to pull out here, especially when it comes to the federal definition of marijuana, I hate that word, but high-test cannabis, as relating only to Delta-9. As we all know, fresh cannabis that has not been decarbed sometimes has a relatively low Delta-9 content. So there's a couple of paths we're looking at in terms of trying to challenge these.
Right.
Hang on. Can I just one quick question for Tim? Does it really surprise you that you're getting federal interaction after everything that's been going on behind the curtains that's not getting any attention, that's being swept under the rug?
Surprise, it's hard for me because am I a little surprised in the District of Vermont specifically? And that's what we have to remember here. It's not one overarching federal government that comes down. It's the individual districts, and it's the individual U.S. attorneys in each district, which, much like the state's attorneys in Vermont across the country, have different perceptions on cannabis. Our state U.S. attorney, Christina Nolan, it does surprise me a little bit, especially the most recent prosecution, only because the priorities that have been enumerated by that office in terms of where they're going to be using their limited resources, this most recent prosecution surprises me because I don't see a lot of those factors in it, which makes me think that their decision-making process is getting looser and looser, which after a year and a half of seeing, virtually no prosecutions, and in fact several prosecutions being rejected and turned down, I guess on one level it surprises me, but on another level I think, and I understand what you're saying, no, it doesn't. It's frustrating, though. It's frustrating when we have Vermonters dying every day. It's frustrating when we have an opiate problem that needs to be addressed, that very limited prosecutorial law enforcement resources are being used on something as harmless as cannabis. That is frustrating, and I think that's the overarching emotion that I'm feeling. Not to mention the fact that good people's lives are being destroyed, continuously being destroyed, for something that in simply another part of this country is 100% legal. That is very frustrating as well, and everybody should be outraged.
I think the question too, Tim, I think it's tough. People see what happened with the hemp, with the case of the hot hemp, which was actually medical marijuana, grown by a licensed, theoretically regulated entity, who has the privilege of that exclusive, license, seeing the state, so far there's been no formal response. That we've seen.
There was a formal response from the Department of Public Safety. We don't see a crime and we're not investigating. That was the formal response.
In fact,
exactly the formal response.
Well, and in fact, you have, these
Thank
people.
you for playing.
Well, and then not only that, I see down in, there's a panel in Brattleboro, and it's like you have these people with their regulators talking on a panel about the future of business, and it's like, well, I guess if the state doesn't care about the diversion of those 230 THC plants, then it's hard to imagine that, the state gets to come after the little guy, So even just that on its face, I think people don't want to believe that there's two sets of rules, depending on where you are in society, and it's tough to be confronted with that reality. And like I see how it goes in politics as well. Mm-hmm. So it's tough for people seeing that, and it's good that hopefully a lot of this stuff isn't going to stick. Because we see it every year in like February, March, and it'll happen again. When the politics heat up, there's somehow a bust. Like somebody created a clandestine lab in Winooski, and we happen to uncover it the week that, this crucial committee in the House is talking about this bill.
Right.
What a coincidence.
Imagine that.
Same thing that they did up in, and this was one of the first stories we wrote for Heady Vermont, was talking with this woman up in Berkshire by the Canadian border. Who they got painted as having like a BHO lab with their kids, like made it sound like they're cooking meth with their kids in their arms. Right. And it was like empty tubes in an old carport, So we've seen how, law enforcement can be weaponized politically. Which observation I'll make and, stick by myself. You don't have to agree with me, Tim, or anybody else. But it's tough. It's tough seeing that, and we hope that just nobody's going to jail. Nobody's being.
Well, we're seeing a lot of the enforcement being done by state police, right? It's not federal agencies raiding these people out in California. You know what I mean? It's the National Guard, legitimately, right?
Well, or like Tim says, it stinks because it's like town by town. Like if your town has a state police barracks in it, are they more motivated, than a town that doesn't? Well,
you also have local law enforcement being drafted by task forces such as Northern Vermont Drug Task Force, which is technically a temporary assignment to the DEA. So now you get this interaction between state law enforcement and federal law enforcement, and the line gets blurred a little bit. But ultimately, the prosecutions that I'm most concerned about at this stage of the game are the federal prosecutions. The state prosecutions, we have a lot of ammunition at this point to be able to fight against them, and that's, I think, why we've been successful in, getting past a lot of those. Federal prosecution, we have a lot less options available to us, and those are the ones that concern me the most. But yes, the task force officers are the ones, at least here in Vermont. Now, California is another world. They have multiple U.S. attorneys. There's multiple things going on. There's, completely night and day from here in Vermont. But if we're talking about just Vermont, I'm not as concerned about the Vermont State Police. Let them do whatever they want to do. We'll handle it in the Vermont State Courts, where I'm very confident that we will get good results at this stage of the game. Federally, the federal task force officers, that's the ones that really people, at least here, have to look out for.
Tim, this is Jeff. I have a question. Is this a larger trend? Do you see this happening in other states? So right before a tax and regulatory framework, and I ask to provide greater context for us Vermonters, from your point of view. As these other states, we watch they're about to flip, they're about to enact their regulatory framework. Does the federal government take that opportunity? Do they see that window to come in, and whether they consider it revenue, whether it's just their sharp elbows? Is this a trend that we see in other states that we can sort of expect until we ultimately implement something ourselves, or what is that landscape?
It is so based on the individual U.S. attorney in that particular district that I wouldn't qualify it as a trend. I mean, we haven't seen many federal prosecutions in Maine. We actually haven't seen any federal prosecutions in Massachusetts. We haven't seen any federal prosecutions in Illinois, which has just recently, passed legalization. So, I wouldn't want to say that there is a trend of federal prosecutions in every state that flips. I will say that law enforcement and prosecutors, a good amount of prosecutors, have a very hard time accepting the fact that cannabis is either being legalized, legal, or on its way to being legal. And the reason for that, in my mind, is simply when you spent your entire 20, 30 years of your career arresting people, destroying lives under the guise of protecting the public, and for a harmless substance, and then all of a sudden being told this substance is harmless, that's a bitter pill to swallow. You've spent your entire career ruining lives for nothing. Sure. And that's a lot of prosecutors and law enforcement have a very, very, very hard time accepting that. Many of them have defined their careers on being the marijuana cops and busting all these horrible potheads. And now that the reality that there was no need for this then, there was no need for it now, there's no need for it in the future, in a sick way, you can try to understand why they have such a hard time letting go of it. And they do have a hard time letting go of it. And I think that's, I wouldn't want to paint a broad brush and say every jurisdiction you can expect this, but there are certain jurisdictions with certain U.S. attorneys and certain law enforcement officials where you will see this kind of last gasp at trying to lock up as many of these dangerous potheads as possible.
We do have one of those old, and we did just transfer in Vermont. We do have a new commissioner, Department of Public Safety. So,
hey, Mike Sherling.
We did. I haven't had a chance to speak, and don't know where he's at. Former chief of police in Burlington, but
Mike Sherling
better than the last guy.
Right, I was going to say, how do you feel about this?
Well, the last guy was an old school drug warrior, who's getting beat up by Billy by Billy Billy Greer for 2 decades, So I read that article, same thing. I read an article from 1995, and it was like special, U.S. Special Assistant Attorney Tom Anderson, who now in 2018 was Department of Public Safety Commissioner. It's like, yeah, of course he's going to think about it this way and do everything.
Tom is the worst. I mean, we could not get any worse of a prohibitionist than Tom Anderson, with the possible exception of Mark Levine, who's our Commissioner of Health. It doesn't get any worse than Tom. I don't think Mike Sherling is going to be ripping a bong hit anytime soon, and I certainly don't think that he is any fan of the industry or of legalization, but I don't believe that Mike is as ardently opposed as Tom was. So I'm
excited to have a conversation.
Slightly better?
Yeah, I'm excited to have a conversation, and hope it's a good chance to kind of reset that relationship and say, hey, let's be functional here. And I met with a doctor not too long ago who's one of the biggest, voices of opposition. She's at every event in every room. I get her emails now, which stinks. It's part of why we got to get our stuff in gear here, because I know I'm not the only one who gets these crazy chain emails.
Right.
But you talking to people who are opposed, and it's like, all right, where can we find common ground? What do we agree we don't want teenagers. We'd rather have teenagers doing sports or music or traveling after school than getting high. So what can we do as people in this community to work with people like you? And let's put out some good messaging, and do it in a way that's smart. Just say no, dare. That stuff obviously failed. I think we look at what Colorado's done. Their Department of Transportation, I've looked at some of those campaigns. They're, a lot of the stuff is really funny. You see stuff go viral and see memes and it's smart advertising. So I think there's ways for us to work with people who have been opponents in the past and even come together and say, all right, look, you guys are going to get your whatever, $4 million for whatever you want. Let's no, we're not going to support you with saliva testing, but we do support, the fact that you need more money to do this advertising or overtime or whatever it is. We don't want to be, and I think this is kind of where we're at with the Growers Association is as everything matures, we want this political conversation to mature and really be more, and that's why we say we want to work with the dispensaries. We have so much to gain by working together. Yeah. The fact that our dispensaries aren't taking out of state cards right now. We're a tourism state. They would be absolutely crushing it. And hey, imagine if they were buying small growers, independent craft, small growers, supplying those. That's something that could be happening right now. So there's a lot of stuff where there's common ground, and that's why we really want to be, positive and want to, like we said,
coalition build.
I think we get. I mean, it seems like, and you tell me if I'm wrong in this. It seems like right now everybody that's vying for a political spot is either cannabis friendly or at least open minded to the conversation. Right? It's not like these walls are being put up and then you're being just literally the hand in your face. I don't want to hear it. Right? It seems like we've seen a lot of these politicians flip. And because that family member got cancer and tried it, and they realized it's not that bad, right? So it's interesting because we talk about the presidential election, right? I mean, now we're going to take it out of the state for a second and talk about the presidential election. I think everybody that's running for president is a cannabis supporter at this moment, right?
Oh
yeah,
maybe not. Yeah, I don't know if we can't let her off the hook totally. I don't think.
Just mute my mic.
Right. I mean, but like it's a different world. I mean, you've been in you've seen we've all seen the industry for multiple years now. The last few years have been nothing but unreal, right?
Yeah.
But we do talk about the states. Worcester, we can go smoke weed on the sidewalk, and the town next to it, I guess you could say, you can't have an event.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we've seen a lot of these issues in other states, which is, hopefully when Vermont goes to that next step, we've like you guys said, we've thought about all these little niches and issues that other state had, right?
Yeah, you see Illinois coming on like full speed, and like there's some stuff we can figure out right off the bat. And like I talked about this with a cannabis advocate, Dave Silberman, phenomenal independent advocate. It's been a really effective and really smart guy. Gives a lot of really good advice. We're talking about like, what about delivery? We see this in California as, maybe a social equity license. If our goal is to, lessen the illicit market, with replace that with regulated cannabis, then how about we go from grower to test to delivery? And, the retail part's going to be really complicated, whether it's, the dispensaries or other people. There's going to be a lot. Go to town meeting this year and talk about it locally and start that conversation. If you're somebody who wants to get involved in cannabis, own a shop, own a grow, whatever, start talking to your town. Start talking to your zoning, start talking to your
That's where it
board.
starts.
This is your free advice. Some of you just live in crappy towns. I'm sorry.
Right now, as it exists, there's two DSPs that really kind of exist for a delivery system that would be a really good model. So one is that you're a direct source cannabis supplier. And this is how it works like in Arizona and California and Washington and Oregon, because everybody does delivery out here. So you have these guys who literally have a warehouse, and their warehouse has all their product in it. And then obviously you just go direct to the website, you order whatever you want.
So it's a basic Amazon.
Yep, it's literally like Amazon. Now the other way that they do this is they do it through like a Prop 203, where it's a P2P delivery service. So there will be a website, there's a donation service, and then the patient-to-patient service, because they're already growing their medical supplies and they are tested. And once again, all these things are tested, labeled, marked. Everything is just like an actual product you would buy out of a store. So there's models to help to actually just take all of the resistance and everything out of it. And the dispensary model is actually a really good one, because then the dispensary, it's just like a pizzeria. Hey, I need an ounce of this and a couple grams of that and these couple of cookies. Send Tony over to Eli's house and take a pizza with you too, Hey.
Well, we have a system in Vermont right now, somewhat, right? Like, because we're talking about our Central Vermont dispensary, homegrown there, that they have the ability to.
Yeah, all the dispensaries deliver, and Grassroots Vermont, again, they were the first ones to do it. They were just doing, I think, flat fee like $5 statewide, and then the other ones kind of had to get on board and catch up, and they all support it. So it's like, we talk about that. There's so much flexibility in the law, and in Vermont, where we have a small legislature and a small population, like, we can be creative and do things better than they do in other states. Let's not just not be dumber. Let's actually be better and think about this and say, all right, there's so much opportunity for everybody, and there's such clear, here's supply, here's demand, here's who you got to go through. You got to tag it and track it, you got to test it, it's got to go someplace, and then it's got to go to somebody who gets their ID checked.
Right.
Like, we have the technology, so
exactly.
I think it's about, how can we, but then there's the realpolitik and just human nature, and there's greed, there's opportunity, there's power, there's all this stuff too. So, it's kind of trying to show people that, here are a bunch of different alternatives. And frankly, for us trying to write legislation actively and, you know, work with the legislation we have and write amendments to that, you know, is present these things and be, you know, it's all carrots, no sticks, you know, like, here's what we can all do together. Like, if you dispensaries are already doing delivery and you have these systems and you're tracking it, you know, and all this, then why wouldn't you be able to do delivery right off the bat?
Right.
You know, I mean...
Yeah, there should be no reason. You're absolutely right.
You know, but like, if I as a small grower have to get my crop tested before it can be sold, or there's only so many people who can buy it and they're setting the price, right? There should be the same rules for them as well, and say, so all right, if we're all getting tested, let's all get tested. Here's how we all agree that there's a right amount of testing that's, you know, that's enough for safety, and that there's probably a different level for medical than there is for adult use. Right. You know, so
now I got a question for you. And this is one thing I haven't heard brought up in many conversations over this in many states. It's, you know, we talk about testing and third parties and this and this and this. What about certifications? Like, so I'm from the restaurant industry, right? I want to go open a restaurant tomorrow. Do you know the certifications I'm going to have to go through just to open my door to be able to sell a cheeseburger to somebody, right? And we're talking about medicine and it's food, and it's the same kind of ideas, right? We're talking about chemicals and things that, you know, you can make bad for a person. Like in meat, you can handle it badly, make someone sick. You can make someone sick with cannabis, right? We're talking about medical cannabis. Should we have a clean green testing thing going on? I mean, I'm asking this not because we're talking about legislation, we're talking about writing it. Should every licensed grow have to get checked out? Like, if I have a license, I'm running a restaurant, the health inspector can come through. They're going to come through twice a year. They're supposed to, right? Do we know when? Never, right? So you're always on your toes in the restaurant field, right? Again, you're playing with people's health, right? You can give somebody a salmonella chicken, you can make them really sick, right? Should there be something like that in Vermont or in most every state? Because, I mean, we talk about, like, it seems like the certification process is like a voluntary thing. Like, hey, I'm USDA organic, or, which you can do now, by the way. The USDA will certify organic hemp farms. Maine has a couple certifications that they have that they put in place for their state, right? Should we have one? I mean, we do have Clean Greens. We do have these companies that will go in and certify a grow, you know?
I think there's two. I think there's two. There's, you know, there are two different kinds. You know, there's what is the minimum, you've met the minimum safety requirements to sell this product
to a place,
you know, and that's like a Department of Health thing. You know, is your fridge cold enough? You know, are you wearing hair nets and beard nets?
Right.
You know, all of those.
Yeah, you can have a backyard barbecue for your friends.
Did you change the filter on your HVAC?
Right.
Like all this stuff. So I think there's kind of the minimum safety, you know, which again I think that can be pretty light. And we think about, you know, we're testing stuff with hemp. You know, we test the source, but we don't test the final product. It's kind of backwards.
Right.
You know, for THC, you know, let's focus on that and say that, you know, if I'm a grower and then you have the other kind of set of certifications, right, where you can, you know, clean, green, or organic. To me, that's about market, you know, and marketing. I don't want the government involved in determining whose quality is best. I think if you go through the trouble of getting those certifications, then, yeah, you deserve to reap the rewards if that's a choice you want to make. And I know that, you know, the NOFA organic, like, that's pretty stringent. You know, and I think they've got about 100 hemp farmers who have gone through that, like you said, and now I think, you know, two to four processors too. So, you know, but I don't know about making that. I don't want the state to make that a requirement. I want them to have a clearly understandable certification, like it is for kitchens. You know, so whether you're doing a $10 million restaurant or opening up a food truck, you know, everybody's got the same rules. They're clear, and then you know, send people around and inspect them. You know, once in a while, like test. You know, we should be doing independent testing.
Well, I mean, shouldn't our dispensaries fall under certification? I mean, we're talking about medicine now. I mean, across the United States.
You're right. I mean, think of it like this: is it the dispensary's responsibility to hire a master grower that has a master's degree in botany? And even if that person has a master's degree in botany, what if they've never grown cannabis?
Exactly.
Like,
well, here's, I think, the problem
forget about it.
Well, I think for us,
forget about it.
The issue, just found fellow paisan, Brandon, guys with vowels at the end of their names. You know, I think the problem is that it's not an open market. You know, I mean, if it was an open market, then don't have any restrictions at all and let people pick and choose which dispensaries sort of rise to the top and don't, and have competition amongst medical cannabis providers to show who can be the best. This is like an economics principle of how markets work if you don't have competition or if you do. Right. So I think it's more just that fact that, and again, that's the system that we have. That's how it is. There's not going to be another dispensary that comes online for medical before we get, right now, there is another license available
for Vermont,
once we hit 7,000 registered patients. We've pretty much flatlined and I think almost declined a little bit, as far as our patient count. So that's probably not going to happen before.
We're just shy of like 6,000 right now, right? I think
it's down to like 5,200.
Yeah.
Well,
like people.
I totally agree. I think it's more about like this. Okay, let's say I'm going to open an extraction unit. All right, and I put a bunch of money into equipment. I'm going to make some really good BHO. I got a couple different chemicals I'm going to use, alcohol, butane, whatever. And I hire someone to run this unit who has a chemistry degree. Do I really want this person cooking with gas if they've never extracted cannabis? Probably not.
No.
Right.
Because then what's going to happen is you're going to create an explosion that's going to take out an entire neighborhood. And then you're going to be responsible for that.
I think a couple of things need to happen in our market right now, and I think we kind of hold our own hand in this. Is that we're starting to see states decriminalize. I was going to ask Tim about the New York thing. That's huge news. They just decriminalize, right? What happens?
That's a huge thing.
So now, we've been on the show before, and a lot of these people that are like really people that are ahead in our industry are felons, right? This is the biggest thing we're talking about. A lot of people have been to jail over cannabis, right? And the minute you go to jail over cannabis, right now in this industry, you're not getting a job. Where the probably the most talented people right now are sitting at home with felonies because they can't get a job in the industry, right? Or they're doing their little homegrown with the best cannabis in the state, right? Now, and you hit it on the head, Brandon and Eli. Like, so I was come out of the culinary world, right? I grew up in kitchens. I was a chef for many years, and then you always see in every industry, whether it's an automotive repair industry, the people that grew up with that tool in their hand versus the person that like went to school, got that education from school, but has never touched never even picked up the tool, really, right? You see a drastic difference when it comes to actual like real life workplace stuff, right?
Yeah, real experience.
But like Brandon is out west, so he's seen a lot of this, and like it seems like the market out west. We'll just use Master Growers for example, right? A lot of these places will spend a couple $100,000 for a good master grower because they don't have issues, they don't have to worry about nothing, right? But now it seems like a lot of these guys are trying, like a lot of these corporations are trying to save that dollar, and they're going to hire the first guy out of school, right? And then what happens? We've seen a couple of these grows out west that lost 2 rounds of grows, and it was like $500,000 worth of product that the guy lost because he's never even had a grow in his bathroom. You know what I mean? He was like, I'm going to go learn how to grow weed and go to school,
they got rid of the grower who made the initial investment where he was like, I'm going to make like $150,000 plus 10% of the total crop. And the guy was pulling down close to $1 million a year off of that dispensary, pushing out an amazing product. They were like, we're going to cut our costs. Don't worry about it. We'll make it up on the back end. It's totally fine. But I want to touch on something real quick, Joe, that you have mentioned about New York. I got 6 counts yesterday because of all that stuff that happened in New York. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, they just made my job a lot harder because, I grew up in New York around Buffalo, and I have a pending license for a cannabis business in that area, like in Hamburg. And now I got 8 master growers who don't have felony licenses. I can license all of them. It's amazing.
Well, that's a good thing about it,
I don't even know
right?
what to do with myself. I have so many choices.
So when they decriminalize, they really have to go back and expunge a lot of these records, right?
They did it yesterday. There's a whole. You got to see this. It's amazing.
For New York, that's what I'm saying. Like usually, most of the cases we've seen where they decriminalize, they haven't gone back and eradicated any of these people that have charges against them or have served a jail time, right?
Yeah, Tim, you told me.
Was Tim still there?
Yeah, Tim. Yeah. Well, Tim and Andrew had a cool story about when Andrew was out in California and what they're doing with social equity and people with felonies out there, right, Tim?
Glad you're mentioning that. Yeah, that's they're actually moving to the front of the list right now in San Francisco. Their social equity program. Prior felony convictions are prior non-conforming businesses, which we can all know what that means. They go to the head. they go to the head of the list, with the concept being that the people that are owed the most of this are the ones who have suffered the most of this. So that is fantastic. That's kind of groundbreaking. That's the only jurisdiction we're seeing that happen in, but I would like to see that kind of expanded. People with felonies should not be excluded from this. People with felonies that are based on cannabis and cannabis alone should be basically, in my opinion, handed a license at this point. And we, again, now seeing that begin to develop out in California, I would love to see that kind of catch on and take place in more jurisdictions.
No, I mean, we've seen it. They tried to roll out in Mass, and Mass is kind of stumbling around with a social equity program right now, which is really too bad to hear about.
They've had some stumbles, but Joe, at the same time, really, Mass was the one who they were the first to kind of come up with the social equity concept, and that is why, I really am proud of Massachusetts. Yes, there's been a lot of issues with it, and they've stumbled out of the gate with it. I think we're starting to see a little more smoother. Delivery is one in California that's they're really focusing on social equity. One of the largest issues is simply this. Social equity is a great idea, but realistically, when you're talking about the barriers to entry to get into the cannabis industry, unfortunately, those who have been targeted most by the war on drugs and the war specifically on cannabis are those who are least able to take advantage of, and get past these barriers. People with low socioeconomic status, those coming, unfortunately, brown and black skin, and people who have really been hammered by this often don't have the resources necessary to pay a $250,000 application fee or have, the resources to be able to start a large business. So that's been one of the stumbling blocks. And what we're seeing now, delivery again in California, that is a very low barrier entry. You don't need a lot to get a delivery license. You don't need a lot to get a delivery operation up and going. So why not, make an expedited path towards some sort of delivery license for those who have been impacted by this to give them an opportunity to take advantage of the new industry. We think that's a fantastic idea, and I would like to see that kind of continue to develop.
You talk about if the state, if the goal of the states to collect these revenues as fast as possible, there's no more efficient way to transfer than delivery. And it's from from a lobbying and advocacy standpoint, can make the case that, all right, if driving's the concern, then let's bring the bud to you.
Right.
That's fine. Most people are going to be using it at their home or at their, vacation or guess what? I got an Airbnb. A couple people smoke weed there, from time to time.
There'd be a lot less stone drivers on the road if you would be able to have delivery routes and people would be able to get their medicine. I mean, a lot of times we stand for the patient that either can't grow their own cannabis because they're that medically disabled in a certain way. I don't want to say like that, but you know what I mean, whether they can't get up or whether they just they can't do it or they physically can't afford it. Because I mean, we talk about grow your own a lot, but before you know it, you can. It's quite a little bit of an investment, right? And then you have the power, right? So, unless you're paying for the technology that's available right now, there's still some stipulations on power. So when we talk to a lot of the guys that are out there consulting and working with these people, and these are the biggest concerns that we see. You know what I mean? It's like literally they need a caretaker. They're literally getting hospital caretakers to come to their house and take care of them, and they're expected to manage.
For sure, we have that's exactly it. I mean, Fran Janik down there in Southern Vermont, great patient advocate and ally. Seen this, and heard stories about this, and you have people who are having, your one-on-one helper come in and even just help you medicate.
But in Vermont, that's not allowed, right? Because you're caretaker. You can't go into someone else's house to caretake them and do their plant counts legally, correct?
No, you can consult.
You can consult, but you cannot caretake for them.
Correct.
Right. Because you in Vermont have your own allotment as well under that license, right? So that's where I think we need to be expanded, because then you give more people options. You know what I mean?
A couple things that
all this is going to be done away with S54, the plant limits. Once we have our small-scale cultivation grow and everyone can grow 500 square feet, this whole thing about 7 immature and 2 mature, 4 immature, and what's mature and what's not mature, this absurdity is all going to go the way to the dodo bird, and we will be able to actually grow this plant the way it was meant to be grown. Patients can have access to high high-quality medications. That's where this needs to go, and that's where we all need to be focused on. Everyone should be able to grow cannabis, whether you're using it for adult use purposes or medicinal purposes, and that's what I'm really hoping. And granted, maybe I'm being a little optimistic here, but I am confident we're going to see this bill pass. I'm confident we're going to see the establishment of a Cannabis Control Board, and I'm confident that this whole 2 and 4 and 2 and 7 plant thing is going to be nothing more than a distant memory within the next 12 to 24 months.
Well, hopefully we'll have multiple licensing, like Eli was, and you guys were saying earlier. Indoor, outdoor, greenhouse. Can we get additional add-ons to our said square feet, and how that will all work out in the future? But the reason why I brought up this whole New York decriminalization thing is because technically in New York you cannot grow plants in your house. I mean, this is the laws they're trying to do. So they're all for a medical system, but you can't home grow. Right. And now they're going to decriminalize. So I mean, what's the thought on this, Tim? Like, just real quick while you're here, because I mean, we've talked about New York a lot. Cuomo's been in a lot of our conversations because it seems to be like they seem to go one way really well, then all of a sudden it's like it's like 5 steps forward, that 2 steps back kind of thing. With decriminalization within New York, though, what's this mean for the home grow? I mean, it really means nothing, right?
Right. I mean, home grow will be addressed with the legalization bill, which I expect New York to pass next year. This is, they couldn't get legalization quite through. It wasn't like there was it was, again, much like Jersey, almost much like Vermont, arguing over the little details. It's not a matter of if, it's simply a matter of when and how. Allocation of tax revenue, opt-in provisions. We're seeing kind of the same issues that eventually will get worked out next year, I'm assuming, and this will be passed. Decriminalization does not address home grow. It does not legalize the plant. It caps the maximum possible penalty. It makes it roughly the equivalent of a civil violation, like a speeding ticket. The expungement is, and you guys had mentioned that briefly before, is fantastic. This will now, by statute, require almost 160,000 people in New York State will have convictions cleared over the next year as they come up with a process to do so. And over 25,000 people will actually now be walking away from this with a clean criminal record, which is incredible. That's just, it's life-changing. It's life-changing, and that's not being overly dramatic to an enormous amount of people for something they never should have had an impact on their life in the first place. But what this does is this basically is, I mean, you can see it, you can just track it in Vermont. We had medical approved, then we had decriminalization, then we had legalization. And it's a slower process. I would have loved to see New York legalize this year, but this is the next step. And what's really beneficial about this is that all of the gloom and doom predictions, again, of the prohibitionists will also now have another chance to not come true. And that makes the arguments against full legalization weaker and weaker and weaker. And we fully anticipate that they will be passing a legalization bill next year. And I know that there is a hard, strong push to allow home grow. And ironically, often the objections to home grow don't come from prohibitionists. They come from the established medical cannabis industry because they don't want competition. They want people to come to the dispensaries and purchase cannabis. They don't want people growing their own medicine at home. Just like home brewing was often, objected to by the alcohol industry. But much like that, I think that, home grow is inevitable. You can't legalize a substance and then tell people they can't simply produce it themselves. And I think maybe, whether it's in next year's bill, that remains to be seen. But again, it just like everything else, for the next, 2 to 3 years, I fully expect home grow to be legal in New York. I'm sure there'll be some sort of, again, regulation and some limits, but you can only stop somebody. Once a substance is legal, once you've legalized cannabis, to outlaw home grow, again, look at enforcement. How do you enforce that now? Random searches, cops show up knocking your door, excuse me, are you growing any cannabis in your home? And the will for prosecution, the time, effort, and resources taken to prosecute cases, prosecutions just don't happen out of the blue. They take prosecutors, they take judges, they take law enforcement, they take resources, they take time. And the more and more we go with legalization, the more and more this industry becomes accepted as a true and legitimate industry, which it is, the less and less you're going to see, these types of prosecutions happen. I fully believe that. And so while it may not be overnight, and well know this decriminalization didn't have anything to do with home grow, it definitely leads us well along the path to get there.
Mm-hmm. Now, I got a quick question, though. I mean, coming from a lawyer in the standpoint, now that we are decriminalizing and we're expunging and we're doing all this stuff, what happens to the people who actually, were incarcerated or lost something due to being convicted of something? Do they have any sort of ability to countersue or try to get or reclaim some of their life back or money that they spent fighting for this?
No. The finances, no. It's horrible. The best they can hope for is some sort of provision like New York with expungement to get it off their records. But the reality is that at the time they committed the offense, it was an illegal offense, and therefore they were properly prosecuted for that illegal offense. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's sickening. But at the end of the day, there's not any legal mechanism by which you can say, oh, well, it's legal now, so therefore you shouldn't have been punished when it was illegal. But that's the benefit of social equity. That's what I think that whole concept is trying to address. It certainly won't address fully, especially anyone who's been incarcerated, lost their jobs, lost their family, lost countless, bits of their time and their life for this. And they're never going to be made whole. That's never going to be fully compensated. But if we can at least do the best that is available, which is expungement of that criminal record, removal of that stigma, removal of the challenges that are created by a criminal record, and perhaps some sort of social equity program allowing that individual to participate in the industry easier and quicker than those who haven't been affected. Is it going to make anybody fully whole? No. Is it the best that we can do right now? Yes. And that's why we are so in support of social equity programs and think that needs to be a major part of any legalization structure.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit about myself. I lost an immediate family member to the war on drugs.
Sorry.
Not over 10 years ago now. But what do I expect? I don't expect to, get financially reimbursed. I don't expect to,
just right the wrong, right?
Exactly. But what we do expect to some extent fairly is to be included and equally considered moving forward.
Well, that's a problem with these felony things. I mean, some of the expungements do not include felonies, and I didn't quite dive into the New York expungement to see what grade of felonies. It looked like it touched base on some felonies, but to a limit, is it all felonies? Because, I mean, most of the guys that went to prison are for growing, which was a felony, right? So they plant counts and growing, and you know what I mean? Some of the best guys that we know within our industry are felons, right? So it's usually through distribution and growth, right? I mean, that's what it was for the last few years. So whether you had 100 plants that you got busted with or not, right? Like Tim says, we had a guy with 4 plants facing a felony in Vermont with a medical card. You know what I mean? Right, so
that's ridiculous.
Thankfully, Tim and the crew and the state kind of looked at this and said, "This is ridiculous," especially in light of some of the other instances that we've had in Vermont of 300.
Yeah, they agreed to that after we filed a 15-page motion. Let me just make that clear. They did not come to that conclusion with a phone call. Having to really put their feet to the fire before they back down. But ultimately they did.
That makes an interesting question on the stigma of where the state and again the judicial bureau of the state or town or county that these particular instances are happening are where they stand with cannabis, right?
Well, and it's cool nationally though, because you hope it's like that. This is now the standard for every state. Every state that comes online includes home grow. Every state that comes online includes expungement. Every state that comes online includes social equity, when it's time for them to look at regulation and taxes. So hopefully this is now the standard is the standard. And this is now the minimum requirements for all states moving forward. Hopefully we see that rolling out.
It'd be nice to even see the states work with each other a little bit more, like reach out to each other. I mean, we know. I mean, you're one of the person that can agree with me a lot. I mean, I've stuck up a lot for our legislatures in the last year, just because I know the situation they're put in. I mean, it's kind of like our dispensaries. Like they're not doing a great job, but they're doing the best of what they are giving. Like because you were saying before, when we're talking about the 3 to 5 person panels. Like it's a amount of work, right? People don't realize that a lot of these senators in these legislatures that are helping us devise these bills don't have a secretary.
Yeah,
they don't have anybody researching
disease
and
versus
talking
the
to
symptom,
them.
man. I mean, we really, if we want to get beyond cannabis politics, like here in Vermont, we need to. I believe, I'm just speaking for myself, a year-round paid legislature. You know, I mean, to imagine somebody who's...
They try and jam all this work in a few months.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in that building, and I only have to talk to them about one thing. You know, other lobbyists are talking about many things, which is why they listen to the other ones a lot more. You know, but it's like you got to talk about cloud computing, you know, school taxes, and cannabis regulation in the same
guns
week.
Last year was another big thing.
Exactly. So it's a lot to ask people. You're not really compensating them for their time, and because of that, you have a lot of people who, you know, if this was a $60,000 a year job to be a representative, how many young people you think would run for that office?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
a
lot. You know, versus.
Well, yeah, Eli. I mean, Eli, just to jump in, you're absolutely right, because look at the way it's structured right now. It incredibly limits the people who can serve. I mean, how many of us can take 7 months off of our jobs just to go down to Montpelier for relatively low pay? Not many.
No.
Not many at all. The wealthy, the retired, that's about the only two classes of people who can manage to do this. Yes, some manage to put it together and make it work, but that is an extraordinary accomplishment. Most citizens and the average citizen in Vermont cannot simply leave their life and leave their career, leave their livelihood for 7 months to go to Montpelier, which significantly limits the representation that we have.
And this is
they know that.
You know, I mean, the Lieutenant Governor was saying, I remember reading about this in 7 Days a couple years ago, you know, and him being criticized for pointing this out, you know, and been saying it for a long time, and a lot of people have, but because, like you said, you see the results that you get, and like realistically, who can, you know, I think if you max out all the subsidies, it's like a $20,000 a year maximum, and the amount of work that these people do, you know, and that's why it's nice to be on the human side of it too, because you do, you know, when you're in the building, you know, you spend time with these people, and you know, you realize they are also people with lives and families, and you know, you may disagree, but you know, you want to approach them, and remember, like, you know, we're in this community in Vermont, and it's like we still all got to live together, which is why, you know, we just encourage people to be, as they're advocating, you know, be respectful, be civil. I always tell people, don't assume, you know, ask questions. You know, you don't know that.
Get educated first.
Yeah, this person who you think might be a square old proper white lady might grow some amazing cannabis because, you know, she's patient and just, you wouldn't know.
Right.
You know, so I think that we're really excited to move forward because there is so much more energy out there. Like you said, every day that the sky continues not to fall, you know, and then we see other states and see cool things happening, you know, and tragic things not happening, I think is a positive step forward. So, you know, we're trying to, the mission here is, you know, elevate the state. You know, as I've said many years.
Times,
so,
right? Now, we got about a minute left. I don't want to cut anybody off. Unfortunately, time's not on our side. It never is, right? As people.
Wow.
As advocates do, we just got to stay alive, man. We're going to outlive them all. So that's the advice for advocates.
Thanks to Cannabis, right?
Yeah.
So, well, we're at the show. I want to thank you guys again, the Vermont Growers Association. You guys want to find out more about these guys? It's vermontgrow.org, right? Growers, sorry. vermontgrowers.org. You guys can go there. There's a great survey if you guys want to get politically involved with what's going on in Vermont right now. These guys are great. Everybody knows Eli from his time at Hetty, Vermont, and his time in the State House last year advocating for our cannabis rights. You've been in the driver's seat for a long time in Vermont, man. I get nothing but respect. I can't thank you enough. I'm really excited about this new project that you're involved with, and yeah, tell everybody real quick again how we can get a hold of you.
It's everybody, man. That's the whole thing. We got a lot of people marching behind us. So, you know, I'm just the pretty face, I guess on radio, which is right? which is great for me and my number of pullovers since we started this whole thing. But yeah, man, I mean, just Vermont Growers, vermontgrowers.org. We've got a great interview that we did on Vermontawana, you know, which is a web show that I'm kind of bringing back. I miss doing media.
Yep. I miss seeing that show, man. I was going to give you a big plug for that.
We had a blast, man. And Sean Simonetti, that kid is a genius, man. He's so talented. So we're really fortunate. We did the first episode with the Growers Association, you know, so people can get a little bit more sense, put names to faces, you know, as well. And kind of get a better sense. So yeah, really appreciate the opportunity to come on, because this is really, it's got to be coalition, it's got to be all of us, and you know, there's no big force behind you leading the charge. It's like all of us. We look around, it's all of us.
Yep.
You know, so all of you out there, all of us, let's do it, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Jeff. Want to give a quick shout out to anybody?
Thank you. If you're in Chittenden County, my family opened up a restaurant called Pizzeria Eda. Check it out.
Yeah, Pizzeria Eda. We're doing shout out Sherpa Seeds. I'm wearing a Dirty Boys Cultivation shirt here as well.
Thank you, Jenny, for being on with us. I know you're the quiet one in the corner here, but we do have to bounce out. I got a couple minutes left of the show. We're going to leave it with Jessalyn Dolan of the Vermont Cannabis Nurse Association, our resident RN, with our health and wellness tip for the week, guys. Don't go anywhere. We appreciate your support. Find us online. Our schedule is getting stacked, and we got a huge shout out to Stone Age Media for working with us, and we can't wait to see where this little new partnership goes, guys. You want to learn more, find us online, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Thank you, guys. This is In the Weeds with Joe Smith and Brendan Barberio. We'll see you next week.
Hi, this is Jessie Lynn Dolan, cannabis nurse researcher, educator, and consultant, and organic cannabis and hemp farmer with Nurse Grown Organics. I founded the Vermont Cannabis Nurses Association and am bringing you a weekly dose of whole plant to whole person medicine and healing tips. Thank you to cannabis nurse Christina York. This week's tip comes all the way from Las Vegas. Christina tells us about the terpene humulene. Did you know humulene, formerly classified as A-carophyllene, is a sesquiterpene named after Humulus lupulus, also known as the hops plant? Yes, the same hops that makes your beer. Hops and cannabis are both in the taxonomic family Cannabaceae. Humulene plays a big role in providing the same aromatic notes to both species of plants. The medical and therapeutic potential of humulene is expansive and well-researched. A 2016 study shows that it may help terminate cancer cells when combined with cannabis and other terpenes. The terpene is present in balsam fir oil and is believed to be an active mechanism in fighting tumors, evidenced by its ability to produce reactive oxygen species. Humulene is present in many therapeutic-grade essential oils and has been used for centuries for its healing qualities. The oil was also known to exhibit antibacterial properties, proving to be active against the bacterium Staphylococcus aureus, also known as staph, when administered in small quantities. Staph is a bacterium present in our bodies at all times, but it can play a role in a host of infections and diseases when exposed. Humulene supports pharmacokinetics, the study of how the